Titanic sinking remains one of the most captivating stories ever told. While countless movies, documentaries, and miniseries have recounted the tragedy, did the unsinkable ship truly create one of the worst disasters in history, or did it spark a revolution in boat safety that would make sure something like this never happens again? This story is the legacy of the Radio Act of 1912, how the Titanic's tragedy shaped the future of wireless communication. April 10th, 1912, a day that changed history. The day the RMS Titanic set sail on her maiden voyage. Her story began in 1909 with the ship's construction in Belfast, Ireland, by the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff for the British shipping company White Star Line. With 16 watertight compartments, she was deemed unsinkable. Around 2,200 people were aboard, from all social classes. It departed from Southampton, England, and headed to New York City. It would take approximately 5 to 7 days to reach its destination. For the first 2 days, all was smooth sailing. This all changed on April 12th at 10:55 p.m. The SS Californian, only about 5 miles away from Cape Race and the Titanic, received a signal indicating icebergs along the Titanic's course. The radio operator, Cyril Evans, using a Marconi wireless apparatus, stated, "Sailman, we are stopped and surrounded by ice."
I asked you whether you saw any icebergs while you were making that circle?
Well, I was practically surrounded by them.
Titanic radio operator on duty Jack Phillips replied, shut up, I am busy. I am working at Cape Race," indicating that he was sending telegrams to Cape Race, Newfoundland, to clear the backlog of passengers' personal messages that had accumulated when the wireless had broken down the day before. The Titanic also received iceberg warnings from other nearby ships, such as the Mount Temple and the Masaba. One detailed message pinpointed the location of heavy pack ice and a great number of bergs.
It was then I first heard of the Masaba message, and when I said I didn't remember it, he told me he'd put it under a paperweight at his elbow and never sent it to the bridge.
This focus on personal messages had tragic consequences, and the most iconic shipwreck in modern history was mere hours away. At 11:40 p.m., a shudder was felt throughout the ship. The Titanic scraped against the iceberg along the starboard side below the waterline, slicing open the hull between 5 adjacent watertight compartments. Water poured in, and the ship began to list. Captain Edward J. Smith ordered Jack Phillips and another radio operator, Harold Bride, to send out a distress signal. Hearing this, Phillips quickly tried to send "Seeking You," distress or CQD. No one replied. Soon after, Harold Bride said, "Send SOS. It's a new call, and it just may be your last chance to send it." SOS was only 6 years old when the International Radio Telegraphic Conference, held in Berlin, selected it for its ease of transmission, which was agreed upon by most maritime nations. The first ship to respond was the Frankfurt, but the liner was 140 miles away. Other ships offered assistance, including the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, but they were all too far away. The Carpathia also heard the ship's distress signal, and the ship's captain replied, "We are coming to your relief." However, it would take them 3 hours to arrive. This was the last ship to reply. Meanwhile, the Californian's radio operator, Cyril Evans, has turned off his wireless at 11, as was standard for the time. The crew and passengers of the closer ship watched the Titanic shoot off rockets, thinking they were fireworks, never hearing the distress calls.
And I saw our rockets being fired, which that ship must have seen. Well, this inquiry says that they did see it, but they didn't think it was a portent of danger. But I would have thought in the middle of the Atlantic, in the middle of the night, that rockets must mean trouble.
At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic disappeared into the Atlantic Ocean. This catastrophic event had a profound impact on society, globally, and drew significant public attention and reaction, namely disbelief and grief, but also fascination. The New York Tribune reported that the Titanic's dead numbered 1,342, including the captain, and that the only survivors were on the Carpathia, who picked them up from the lifeboats. Furthermore, in 1912 alone, there are 112 different pieces of music inspired by the shipwreck copyrighted in America. Only 2 days after the sinking of the Titanic, inquiries were conducted by both the United Kingdom and the United States. They questioned White Star Line officials, government officials, survivors, and those who had aided the rescue efforts. During the investigations, it was found that radio interference contributed to delays in rescue operations, and the Titanic's captain ignored iceberg warnings from other nearby ships. This disaster was an example of what could happen when technology developed faster than regulation. In the wake of the Titanic disaster, Congress stepped in to establish radio guidelines. Senator William Alden Smith, chairman of the commission, proclaimed, "The elements of nature have chosen darkness as the most helpful medium of radio communication, and operators should be at their post at the time of the voyage, ready to catch every unfavorable sign and to apprise officers and crew of dangers besetting the ship." In other words, Congress needed to ensure that such a failure in communications was never repeated. Thus, on August 13th, 1912, Congress passed the Radio Act of 1912, which was signed by President William Howard Taft. This became one of the most significant turning points in boat safety, preventing misuse of radio communications directly influenced by the sinking of the Titanic. Accordingly, requiring all radio operators to be federally licensed by the Department of Commerce and all ships to maintain constant radio alert for distress signals. One such turning point was for maritime radio operators. In order to become licensed, individuals must pass an exam. In 1912, this was enforced by the Department of Commerce and Labor, where amateur first grade and amateur second grade operator licenses were issued. Later in 1934, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, in the United States converted licenses into different classes, such as the technician, general, and amateur extra licenses, each requiring different levels of knowledge, skills, and man-hours. Enforcement of the Act was given to the Department of Commerce and Labor, who could impose fines up to $2,500, seize broadcasting equipment, or revoke the license of broadcasters who failed to comply with the law. Another important turning point in the Radio Act of 1912 concerned operational expertise and protocols. The official report on the Titanic specifically stated there must be an operator on duty at all times to ensure the immediate receipt of all distress, warning, or other important calls. If the Radio Act of 1912 was passed before the Titanic sinking, it could have received warning of the iceberg and steered away just in time. Likewise, the Californian would have had a radio operator on duty all night, receiving the distress calls, resulting in a quicker rescue. Overall, the Act created several immense turning points in history by helping save over 1,000 ships and lifeboats with distress signals. It set a precedent for international and federal wireless laws. One example of the success of the Radio Act of 1912 was the MS Princeton, a luxury cruise liner, which experienced a fire in the engine room on October 4th, 1980. The ship broadcast an international distress call, which was picked up by the U.S. Coast Guard and the radio operator on the tanker Williamsburg. Consequently, all 520 passengers of the MS Princeton were safely evacuated into lifeboats and rescued by various vessels. This incident underscores the importance of having a radio operator on duty at all times, as their quick response to the distress call played a crucial role in the successful rescue operation. In conclusion, the Radio Act of 1912 was a pivotal moment in the history of maritime safety by creating several turning points in history to ensure orderly and effective ship-to-ship communication, thus launching a new era in radio communications. Even though today maritime communications are primarily via satellites, the use of radios on ships remains integral. The Radio Act of 1912 was a law that changed maritime safety forever. Where out of the tragedy of the Titanic, new turning points were made, ushering in a new era that prioritized effective ship-to-ship communication and ultimately saving countless lives.